I didn't even realize how I ended up without my wallet. Just a moment ago, it was in my hand, and now my palms are empty, and my eyes scan around in confusion. The colorful, noisy caravan is already rounding the corner, and I'm still standing in the middle of the square, unable to move. Gypsies. A people whose vibrant costumes and fiery dances hide a far more complex reality. Why is it that gypsies, more than any other group, have become associated with financial schemes and fraud? How many times have they been suspected of crimes or accused of wrongdoing? Secret financial dealings, manipulations, and skirting the law. It's almost instinctive. As soon as people hear the word, negativity floods in. Gypsies. But what do we actually know about them? Where is their homeland? Do they even have one? I've never heard of or seen a place on the map called Gypsyland. So, let's try to unravel at least a few questions about this well-known yet largely unfamiliar community, one that most of us have encountered at least once in our lives. The journey of this unique and enigmatic people begins in the depths of ancient India, a tale of adaptation, rich traditions, and, yes, an ability to skillfully deceive and manipulate. I'll try to explain it in simple terms, along with a few fascinating facts. The Gypsies' homeland is believed to be in the northwestern part of India, in what is now the state of Rajasthan. Around the 10th or 11th century, they began to migrate en masse to other regions. Why they left their native land remains a mystery to this day. They had no written language, and still don't, so there are no historical records. Everything that happened was passed down orally, with stories from the elders being the only way to trace their history. Perhaps there were wars at the time, destroying their villages and fields and leaving them without food or shelter. Or maybe natural disasters forced them to leave, who knows? Unfortunately, historians have yet to find any documentary evidence of the start of their nomadic life. What is clear is that one day, large groups of gypsies set out in search of better living conditions, leaving their homeland behind forever. Gradually, they moved through Iran and Asia Minor into Europe and beyond. Some of them reached Byzantium, where they converted to Christianity. Gypsies in Byzantium worked as blacksmiths, crafted harnesses, trained animals, not the bears we might expect, but snakes, and practiced fortune-telling. It's worth noting that in Byzantium, fortune-telling wasn't frowned upon, it was considered a regular profession. At that time, gypsies lived a settled lifestyle, residing in villages or on the outskirts of cities, fully integrated into the broader society. However, after the Ottoman conquest of Byzantium, most of them packed up their belongings once again and moved westward. They settled in the Balkans, Bohemia, Germany, and Poland. Some who remained under Ottoman rule converted to Islam. In Europe, in memory of the empire they once called home, Byzantine gypsies began referring to themselves as Roma, a term derived from their connection to the Roman Empire. However, it was on the European continent that these Roma began to be called gypsies. How did that happen? Let me explain. When the Roma first arrived in Europe around the 14th century, they were perceived as mysterious wanderers from the Far East. Many called them Egyptians. Wait, you might say, what does India have to do with Egypt? Gypsies and Egyptians are entirely different people. And you'd be right. But don't rush to accuse me of inaccuracy, let me clarify. The misconception stemmed from a mix-up that dates back to the Middle Ages. In the late 14th century, a strange group of people appeared in European cities. Their way of life didn't fit the norms of the time. They didn't settle down, acquire land, or build homes. Instead, they lived as a community, setting up small camps just outside city walls. Their origins were shrouded in mystery. People tried to guess who they were and where they came from. The gypsies themselves, at that time still calling themselves Roma, added to the intrigue by sharing mystical stories about their origins. They told locals they came from Little Egypt. This wasn't a real country but more of a mythical place mentioned in tales of the era. By claiming this, they sought to command respect or deflect suspicion. To most Europeans, Egypt sounded exotic and mysterious, evoking images of ancient civilizations. The gypsies' appearance only added to the enigma. dark skin, vibrant clothing, and unusual customs. All of this seemed Eastern to Europeans, and Egypt was synonymous with the East. Since the Gypsies were always on the move, people couldn't tie them to any specific place, and the legend of Egypt served as a convenient explanation. At that time in Europe, there was a widespread belief that the Roma were descendants of biblical figures or peoples exiled for their sins. Egypt is often mentioned in the Bible as the setting for ancient stories, so it seemed logical to associate these people with that region. And here's where, as often happens in history, one small mistake led to significant consequences. In this case, it wasn't even a mistake, just a phonetic coincidence. The word gypsy in English, gitanos in Spanish, and gitans in French all originate from a shortened form of Egyptians. Egyptians, gitanos, gypsies. Over time, this error became entrenched, and even the nomadic people themselves began to adopt the name. As the years passed, the image of the Egyptian gypsy was romanticized in literature, music, and art. For example, in the works of Victor Hugo and Prosper Mérimée, gypsy characters are often depicted as mysterious and freedom-loving. Artists, too, were captivated by the vibrant and beautiful image of the gypsy woman. But let's not get distracted by the arts and keep moving forward. Here are some amusing historical anecdotes from that time. In 1505, Scottish King James IV granted a royal document to a group of gypsies, referring to them as Lords of Egypt. He genuinely believed they represented Egyptian nobility. While this was a mistake, the document allowed the gypsies to travel freely throughout Scotland for a time. In England during the 16th century, a group of gypsies convinced a local lord that they could predict the future. In exchange, they requested food and shelter. A few days later, it turned out they couldn't predict anything, and had also stolen several of the Lord's geese. Imagine how upset the Lord must have been. Indeed, gypsies were often known for their knack for borrowing things that weren't securely guarded. But how did they communicate with the peoples of different countries? Did all gypsies speak multiple languages? And what about their own language? Did this community have its own linguistic culture? Of course, they did. Gypsies speak a language called Romani, an Indo-Aryan language rooted in Sanskrit, the ancient language of India. For example, the word Ram means man or person. This language adapted under the influence of the countries where gypsies lived. In Eastern Europe, Romani contains many Slavic words, while in Spain, it includes Spanish words. Interestingly, as gypsies traveled across Europe, they added words to their language simply because they found them amusing or beautiful. As a result, various dialects of Romani include borrowings from French, Turkish, and Greek. Still, the core of the language remained Romani. In fact, studying the history of the Romani language helped uncover the true origins of the gypsies. The truth that this people originated from India was only discovered in the 18th to 19th centuries through linguistic research. Scholars found that Romani had many similarities with Sanskrit and Indian languages. However, the historical misnomer Egyptians or gypsies has persisted in European languages to this day, serving as a reminder of an old misunderstanding. So, we've learned a bit about the history of the Roma people. But the central question remains unanswered. Why did the Roma become so closely associated with fraud, theft, and financial manipulation? How did this nomadic community turn the whole world into their playground without rules? Stereotypes about their connections to the shadow economy and their knack for bending laws have existed for decades. Historically, the Roma were isolated from mainstream societies, forcing them to seek unconventional ways to earn a living. Selling counterfeit goods, engaging in illegal trades, and participating in gray market activities cemented this image. Fortune-telling, street vending, and the art of manipulation were just a small part of their financial toolkit. Today, we'll lay all the cards on the table and talk about what is rarely discussed openly. The image of gypsies as perpetual tricksters who prey on simple, naive people developed over centuries and has both historical and cultural roots. But how fair is this stereotype, and where did it come from? Let's delve into some real-life examples from different eras. The roots of this perception likely lie in the distant past, back in 14th to 15th century Europe. When the Roma first arrived, their nomadic way of life immediately raised suspicions among settled populations. People couldn't understand why these outsiders didn't farm the land, live in houses like everyone else, or stay in one place. At that time, anything unusual was viewed as dangerous. The Roma, meanwhile, had to find ways to survive. Farming or settling down wasn't practical for a nomadic group, so they often resorted to taking valuable items in a way that wouldn't be immediately noticed. For example, in 15th century Germany, a group of Roma arrived in a village and offered to tell the locals fortunes. They charged money, promising prosperity, but shortly after they left, the villagers noticed that silver spoons and grain had disappeared from their homes. This story became legendary, and similar tales were told widely, even if there was no concrete proof of wrongdoing. In the 16th century, Spain passed a law banning the Roma from performing at fairs. Authorities believed their performances distracted people from work and could cause unrest. The government also feared that the Roma spread harmful ideas of freedom and independence. By then, the Roma were already seen as outsiders who supposedly posed a threat to the established order. Settled populations viewed nomads with suspicion, accusing them of theft, fraud, and unfair competition. Local merchants began complaining to authorities that these wandering communities were stealing their business. Such bans only deepened the Roma's isolation. As it became increasingly difficult for them to earn a living through traditional means, societal prejudices against them grew stronger. Gypsy performers continued their craft, but often had to do so covertly, breaking laws. To avoid detection, they sometimes performed under the guise of other ethnic groups, such as Arabs. This only added to their mystique and made them seem even more dangerous in the eyes of society. Ironically, what authorities tried to suppress became a source of national pride centuries later. Today, flamenco, an art form known for its vibrant rhythms and passionate dances, is recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Its roots are deeply intertwined with Roma culture. The Roma, forced to travel due to persecution and mistrust, survived through trade, entertainment, and crafts. Their resourcefulness was initially born out of necessity but eventually evolved into fraud, not from malice at first, but as a practical means of survival. Over time, this became a more lucrative activity requiring minimal effort. In France, Roma traders would sell magical items to local peasants, such as charms to ward off illness or protect against the evil eye. Later, people would discover these were nothing more than beautifully packaged pieces of wood or ordinary stones. Stories like these spread quickly, fueling the stereotype of Roma deception. The image of the Roma has been shaped over centuries in the public consciousness. Tales of their cunning were reinforced by books, films, and media reports. For example, 19th century literary characters like Carmen and Prosper Mérimée novella often depicted Roma as thieves or tricksters. In cinema, they are frequently cast as fortune-tellers or con artists. And today? How do the Roma live in the modern world? Are they still skilled at deceiving unsuspecting people? Unfortunately, in many cases, yes. You don't have to look far. Markets, train stations, and busy streets are hotspots where countless victims recount similar stories. I didn't even realize my wallet was gone. Many mistakenly believe they were hypnotized. The belief that Roma use hypnosis to deceive their victims stems from a mix of cultural traits, psychological mechanisms, distorted perceptions, and entrenched stereotypes. Let's break down where this idea comes from and why so many people are convinced it's true. First, Roma culture has long been associated with magic, fortune-telling, and mysticism. Roma fortune-tellers were masters of suggestion, creating a mysterious atmosphere with mesmerizing speech and confident words. This gave the impression that they possessed supernatural abilities. Second, the Roma often relied on charm and psychological tricks when interacting with people. They spoke softly, convincingly, and continuously, leaving their audience little time to think critically. These communication techniques are sometimes mistaken for hypnosis. In reality, the Roma don't use hypnosis in the scientific sense. What they practice is emotional manipulation, a blend of psychological pressure, persuasive skills, and distraction techniques. Here's an interesting fact. One method often attributed to so-called Roma hypnosis is known as rapid attention capture. It's a technique used not only by con artists, but also by professional illusionists. For example, famous magicians employ similar methods to create a sense of magic. So, when a Roma fortune teller starts speaking to you, it's best not to engage or try to figure out what they're saying. They're not interested in your well-being, they're assessing your financial situation and willingness to part with your money. But this isn't just crime for profit, it's a strategy honed to perfection. Their methods are an art form, precise, calculated, and almost always untraceable. One of the most notorious tactics is working in groups. While one person distracts the target with conversation or a fortune-telling offer, another discreetly empties their pockets. A similar incident occurred in Paris. A tourist was surrounded by a group of children offering to help with a map or directions. While one child pretended to struggle with understanding, another silently slipped the tourist's wallet out of their pocket and vanished. The victim later insisted their gaze had been drawn to the first child, but in reality, it was a well-practiced distraction technique. A Polish woman shared a story about a Roma fortune teller at a market who offered to cleanse her money from bad energy. The fortune teller began rapidly muttering and waving her hands. Without realizing it, the woman handed over all her cash. Later, she was convinced she had been hypnotized, though it was more likely a combination of suggestion and psychological manipulation. But these are the more harmless examples. The scope of Roma-related crimes ranges from petty theft to large-scale scams. For instance, in Romania and Bulgaria, entire families have been uncovered orchestrating massive fraud schemes involving social benefits, posing as fake refugees to claim payouts. The Roma are often involved in financial schemes. For example, in the 2000s, a Roma group in Italy was accused of forging documents to claim social benefits. In Spain, rumors still circulate about underground auctions where the Roma sell stolen gold, carefully avoiding cameras and witnesses. The Roma have mastered the art of exploiting human fears and weaknesses, turning trust into their most powerful weapon. During Spain's housing boom in the 1990s, Roma clans took full advantage of the situation. They forged documents, purchased apartments and houses using fake mortgage agreements, or bypassed verification processes entirely. Many of these activities were conducted in collaboration with or under the coordination of larger mafia groups. Their primary victims were often trusting retirees. Elderly individuals, unfamiliar with complex legal processes, were targeted by Roma posing as pseudo-buyers or real estate agents. The elderly, feeling pressured and confused, sold their homes at below-market prices or transferred ownership to third parties. These properties were resold at a significant profit within months, and the buyers disappeared without a trace. In some countries, there have been reports of Roma posing as representatives of charitable organizations. Imagine a group of people in tattered clothes, with downcast eyes and sorrowful expressions, approaching religious or kind-hearted individuals on the street. They would tell heart-wrenching stories about poor orphans, abused women, or destitute elders. These Good Samaritans collected donations for noble causes, sick children, orphanages, or treatments for incurable diseases. Their heartfelt pleas often convinced people to give away all their money out of compassion or, for deeply religious individuals, as an act of salvation for their souls. Interestingly, similar schemes are now being attributed to Ukrainian refugees in Russia, people displaced and left without a homeland. This raises an important question: could the behavior of the Roma be linked to their lack of a true home or native land? Without a sense of belonging, love for one's roots, or strong faith, it becomes harder to stay grounded and maintain integrity of heart and soul. For the Roma, faith seems to revolve around money, and happiness is measured by the number of gullible people they've deceived. Think you'd never fall for the tricks of these cunning women? That's one of the most common mistakes. Roma women are exceptionally skilled psychologists and manipulators. They can sense a potential victim from a distance. And let's face it, we're all susceptible to emotions and vulnerabilities. Imagine this: you've just had a conflict at work with a colleague who happens to be related to your boss. You're in despair, your thoughts racing to find stability, but there's no one around to talk to. Then she appears, a mysterious woman in a brightly patterned scarf, with dark, piercing eyes and a voice that seems to silence everything around you. The fortune-telling begins, no concrete facts, just fragments of words that strike an emotional chord. Before you know it, you're pouring out your heart to her, a stranger, because you need to unload your feelings. Soon, the nightmare begins. This isn't just magic, it's a chess match where you're always the pawn. After reading your future, she predicts poverty, imminent death, or the loss of loved ones. The more you believe her, the more terrified you become. In your panic to escape these curses, you hand over everything you have, money, jewelry, anything to pay off the bad fortune. But this isn't magic, it's a scheme. In seconds, you've become her personal ATM. These women leave people without money but full of faith in miracles. That belief in miracles is their greatest weapon, turning fears into gold and naivety into keys to unlock strangers' wallets. But when the fortune-telling and magic end, a much darker reality begins. When it comes to the illegal drug trade, the Roma are not just suppliers or couriers, they are key intermediaries between Eastern and Western Europe. A typical setup involves Albanian, Serbian, or Montenegrin cartels on one side and Roma groups managing transport and distribution on the other. Their nomadic lifestyle makes them hard to trace, as they're not tied to specific territories. Children often act as ideal couriers, moving unnoticed and leaving no trail. But drug trafficking isn't their only method of profiting from fear and desperation. The Roma are also deeply involved in human trafficking, a modern form of slavery that still exists, albeit in less overt ways. They manipulate and exploit the lives of abducted individuals, selling them into Eastern European brothels or forcing them to work in illegal workshops. For instance, in 2015, British police uncovered a network where Roma groups kidnapped women and forced them to work in so-called massage parlors. The nature of their work requires no further explanation. Women aged 18 to 30 were lured from Eastern Europe under the pretense of legitimate jobs, only to find themselves trapped in modern-day slavery. In 2008, a criminal group in Paris was discovered using young girls for street trading. The Roma had abducted several underage girls, aged 12 to 16, from impoverished areas in Eastern Europe. After months of surveillance, the police arrested 7 individuals. However, such cases are rare. Most go unpunished. The law often plays little role here. Police frequently turn a blind eye because Roma groups are skilled at creating cover stories and can influence law enforcement. They forge connections with high-profile criminals who shield their activities in exchange for a cut of their operations. Their way of life is a game without rules, where the stakes are higher than they seem. How does a people who have lived on the margins of the law for centuries survive, facing hostility, poverty, and persecution? Isolated from mainstream society, they've built a closed system where every family is a pillar and every clan a shield. They've established internal rules to maintain intergenerational ties, prevent betrayal, and protect one another in even the toughest circumstances. A Roma clan isn't just a family, it's a well-oiled machine governed by strict discipline, where even minor missteps can cost someone their trust or their life. Imagine each member as a cog in a vast mechanism, each part operating according to the rules. At the top of it all is the Baron. The Baron decides who does what, issues orders, allocates resources, and enforces discipline. The matriarch, the clan's eldest woman, is the power behind the throne. She oversees the household and children, but her influence runs deep, extending to personal decisions within the clan. For example, marriages are often arranged at her direction. A wrong choice can come at a steep price. The youth are little more than pawns in the game. They are sent out to earn income for the clan. Former members have recounted growing up in a culture of fear. Mistakes are not forgiven. You must bring money back, otherwise, don't come home. If someone betrays the clan or breaks its rules, they are cast out completely, no family, no support, no home. At first glance, it's a perfectly functioning system where everyone knows their place. But that's far from the truth. Rivalries and serious conflicts can arise within this large family. So, how does the Baron maintain order? That's where the Kris, the traditional court of honor, comes into play. But this isn't a court in the conventional sense, it's a spectacle of drama. The Kris is typically convened by the Baron or the clan elders to resolve significant disputes, arguments over money, accusations of betrayal, breaches of tradition, or insubordination. Public humiliation is common. Accusations often lack evidence, and punishments can be harsh. There are no lawyers, no proof, only words and authority. One story that reached the media described a woman who was forced to walk around with a branded mark on her face after being accused of stealing from her own people. Gypsy clans live by their own rules, making them a convenient influence group that can be easily controlled through their leaders. Unscrupulous politicians have taken full advantage of this. This is arguably one of the main reasons why high-ranking officials rarely speak openly about the Roma. In Romania and Bulgaria, there have been documented cases of local politicians buying votes en masse from Roma families. For a couple of €100 or a sack of food, the clans would vote as instructed. Organizing riots, diverting attention from political scandals, and other forms of societal pressure are tools that make this unofficially recognized nation so valuable. During one election campaign in Hungary, a candidate staged an entire show for the Roma community, bringing a truck full of food, clothing, and alcohol to buy their favor. Later, it was revealed that the same candidate had been covering up the clan's illegal activities, including human trafficking. In the end, it's a game where everyone suffers, except those in control. And you never know when you'll become an unwilling participant. As you've probably gathered, the laws of the countries where the Roma live often mean nothing to them, and this is perhaps the most striking thing. Let me share a story my best friend witnessed over 20 years ago in Russia. Such a scenario could happen in any country, even today. My friend was visiting his brother in a small Russian town. His brother's elderly neighbors had recently sold their small plot of land and house before moving in with their children. A Roma family moved in next door. My friend's brother was deeply concerned. Knowing their reputation for taking what doesn't belong to them, he secured locks on every door and shed, ready to tally up any losses. But to his surprise, the large family suddenly left, leaving only a grandmother and a grandson to look after the place. It's worth noting that in Roma culture, early marriages are common. Girls are expected to marry before the age of 16. After that, they are considered old and unwanted. Boys can marry a bit later. Marriages are usually arranged by the parents, with little regard for the feelings of the young couple. What matters is the union of the families and the bride price paid by the groom's family. Now, back to the story. One morning, while my friend's family was peacefully having breakfast, they heard shouting and commotion coming from the neighboring yard. Surprised, they rushed outside to see police officers holding a 15-year-old girl by the arm while a boy was angrily lunging at them with his fists. It turned out that the girl was the wife of the young Roma neighbor. He had recently married her and brought her to the house his family had purchased specifically for the young couple. Under Russian law, both the girl and the boy, being under 18, were required to attend school. However, neither of them was enrolled, which constituted a violation of Russian legislation and carried legal consequences. As for the intimate aspect of their relationship, no criminal charges were applicable. Both participants were over 15, and there was no significant age gap between them, as both were minors. Responsibility fell on their parents, but none were present. The decision was made to return the girl to her family home since she lacked any documentation permitting her to reside there. In Russia, marriage certificates are only issued to individuals who are at least 16 years old. The girl resisted as much as she could. Returning to her family would be akin to a death sentence, as the bride price had already been paid. The police stood firm, asserting that since they lived in Russia, they had to abide by Russian laws. And they were right. It remains unclear how the Roma managed to convince the officers to wait until the following day, likely by promising that the girl's parents would come for her. The authorities left, pledging to return the next day. However, during the night, the Roma family packed their belongings, a common occurrence for them, and left for an unknown destination. This is a vivid example of how Roma live by their ancient laws, disregarding any outside authority. Today, Roma communities can be found worldwide, particularly in Europe, America, and Russia. They maintain their identity, even as many have settled and become part of urban populations. Their contributions to global culture, music, dance, their unique language, and boundless zest for life cannot be ignored. But how the beauty of their traditions, songs, and dances coexists with their frequent criminal behavior remains a mystery. You will never see a Roma as a laborer or farmer, tired but proud of their hard work. They have never engaged in political struggles on behalf of any party. After all, what would they fight for when they have no homeland or flag? They have never worked for anyone other than themselves and their families. They live by their own rules and do not recognize others. Yet they seem to adapt and negotiate with authorities. Officials often turn a blind eye to the issue of Roma criminality, perhaps because it's convenient. In the worst-case scenario, there's always someone to blame for failures and shortcomings. So, what should we, ordinary people, do? Should we tremble with fear and flee at the sight of a Roma camp as if we'd encountered a fearsome dragon? Of course not. That would be foolish and absurd. Instead, remain vigilant, keep your composure, and avoid engaging with them. End the conversation and leave immediately. Perhaps the 21st century, with its surveillance cameras and digital technologies, will make our streets safer. But fraudsters will always exist, and they won't always be Roma. Our safety ultimately lies in our own hands. And hopefully, you'll never have to say, "Where's my wallet? Where did the money in my digital account go?"